Hi, my name is Victoria Bard, and I'm the founder of createYES, and welcome to the Summit for Your Environmental Sustainability, where sustainability is about more than just climate change, but also about what you can do in your life to create shifts for the planet. My guest today is Tigrilla Gardenia. Oh, and she is so many things. She is a musician, dancer, Kabbalist, a knight, a circus owner in the past, and also a nature-inspired leader with an impressive education who has studied with some of the greatest minds in bio-inspired sciences. She is a cutting-edge visionary with an applied knowledge of biomimicry and nature-inspired systems designs, and a woman with a passion for biophilia. Besides being a nature-inspired leadership mentor, she also studies plant intelligence and the effects of plant music on human health, all from her home in Damanhur. Tigrilla, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Sometimes when I hear it, I'm like, oh, are they talking about me?
Indeed. Well, you have done so many things, and it's just a blessing to have you on here with me today and for our listeners. Who knows where the plant medicine and the plant spirits will take us today.
Exactly. That's the exciting part. That's the fun part.
So tell me, at the very beginning, give us a foundation of how you are here studying plant medicine and plant intelligence, rather.
Whew. Okay. So let's see. Let's go back in time let's go back in time a little less than 9 years, because I've been here living in Damanhur, which, for those that don't know, Damanhur is one of the largest spiritual eco communities in the world. And I've been living here for 9 years, actually. My anniversary is coming up. It is the 2nd of July. So
wonderful.
Yeah, so it's so I was here at Damanhur one day. Now, my background, as you said, is pretty varied. My background is always included music and engineering. Those are kind of like the two pieces that have always tapped in. I studied music engineering and electrical engineering at university. I've worked in high tech, and those were always connected to music and technology, and really, how do we enable people to do things that they've never done before, or to experience things that they've never done before. And I always say that, like, my life purpose is really to make the dreams of others come true. How do I help people really discover their dreams and make them and turn them into a reality in a new and unexpected ways? So I was here at Damanhur one day, and I heard this music like playing, and it was a very unusual music. You know, we as humans have what we consider to be music, connected to certain rhythms, connected to certain sounds, but this was not following any of the patterns that I had ever heard before. And I started to look around for the source of the music, and I followed back, and I found this like little, actually kind of medium-sized box that was playing, that was connected to a speaker making the music. And I followed the cables back, and I discovered that there wasn't a human making the music, but in reality it was a plant. And I just sat there and I listened to this music. And one of the things about the music was just, music, some people think that music is a language, but in reality, it's language that's a musicality. And this was something that I've learned subsequently. But in reality, we listen first for musical rhythms and tones. They speak to us. That's the reason why we connect so easily to the world of music. And so as I listened to this music and I was looking at this plant that was making this music, it was almost as if we could have a conversation. It was almost as if I could hear what the plant wanted to communicate. And that just opened a world that, continues to grow today into the plant mind. How do plants think? What are plants thinking? How do they work from a biological perspective as well as from a spiritual perspective? Because one of the benefits of living in a place like Damanhur, being a spiritual eco community, is that we can really balance both and think about it from the multiple points of view that exist in this world and bring it together to create an understanding and a new level of relationship.
Last week at World Unity Week, I happened to see a presentation by someone else who lives at Damanhur, and the visions of the art and science that you have brought together is just profound. Mm-hmm. And I I can't imagine who wouldn't want to go visit for an opportunity to just be in that space. And last year I had the opportunity to be at a workshop with Kathy Mason, and she had someone with this machine, and the sounds of plants, the music of plants. And they said, come and you know, talk to the plant with your hands. And I did. Oh, she likes you. And I'm like, oh. So I just kept sending energy, and the plant was responding, and it was real. It was my first introduction, but it was wonderful. Mm. Is it possible that we can dive right in and hear some of the music of the plants right now? I thought it would come later, but I think
we have to follow the flow, and this is what it is. So absolutely. Good. And so so I have sitting here with me one of my biggest collaborators. This is a plant that has worked with me on many different occasions, including helping me design one of my courses and one of my big sort of gifts that I give out to people, which is a 3-day mini viz that allows people to communicate with plants. So I want to introduce Key. This is spider plants. And as you can see, spider plant has a little connection here. So the way that this device works, which is here in my hand, so I'm going to kind of come back up so you can see me, although, you know, Key is the musician. So the way that this device works, this is the music of the plant bamboo. So this is a device that just came out a few years ago. When the device I was talking about was much larger. And in reality, when we were working with the larger device, it wasn't even open to the public at the time. I was very lucky that, as I said, my background being in music, engineering, as well as with technology, I had come to Damanhur to help bring Damanhur out into the world, to work on the social media, to work on the website. And then I was asked to work on what would be the launch of bringing this device out to a larger public. And that was really exciting because it was something that I was already starting to study with, something I really wanted to go deeper into, and the opportunity to bring it out to the world in a much bigger way so that people could bring this home and use it. And since then, I've continuously gone deeper with this practice. I've done research studies into the effects of plant music on human health. I have a Facebook group that we bring together all different types of artists, whether that be musicians or poets or painters, in order to design new types of interspecies art. So there's a lot of new areas that are opening up thanks to this. So this device was the latest one that the Music of the Plants group came out with because it's small, it's portable, it's a lot easier to kind of bring around. So that's just turning it on. Don't worry, that's not the plant yet. So let's see what we got. Oh, we have a plant that's playing. This is the thing about playing with plants. Actually, we have my device that's not allowing me to bring the volume up.
Everything is perfectly imperfect.
Yeah, well, I have been on stages around the world with plants, and let me say that they are finicky little guys, you know, so this is actually one of the fun parts of working with plants, is that you have this opportunity to really learn new aspects of the way that they think, and it's a lot like working with children.
Ah, hello. I wonder.
Do it.
Only you would know if this is going through the internet of sound frequency.
Actually, that's not true. You would know. All you have to do is listen for it.
I heard some.
So every plant has a different kind of signature. And one of the signatures this plant has is that drop into low notes, that connection point when, the plant really communicates with a human being, drops into these lower points. That's one of the things that's kind of a signature that I've developed over the years with many of the plants that I've worked with. And this particular plant also was, he had a really fun time with us because we developed an interspecies virtual band. At the very beginning of the lockdown phase, we decided that we were going to try a new experiment. We had key record a track about 10 minutes long, and then we had 3 other plants and 3 other human beings.
Oh, 3 other plants.
Yeah, so we had humans and plants all playing separately, and then we mixed it all down to make one virtual kind of ensemble piece. It's quite lovely to hear all of this coming from the connection with the spider plant. So these are the types of experiments that we're also working with relating to plants.
Well, now might be a good time for me to ask you to tell us about Luca.
Luca, wow, you did do your research.
I did. I was deep dive. I couldn't help myself. I just kept looking. You have so much information on your website, and I encourage people to go take a little peek because you might lift and find all the layers. So yes, tell us about Luca.
So Luca is a chestnut tree. Luca, at one point when I was living here in Damanhur, I was living in the Sacred Woods Temple. This is just as the Sacred Woods Temple, the Sacred Woods was turning into a temple. So it was evolving into this, what is now a temple space. And I lived in the middle of this forest, and we had a chestnut tree right outside of my room. There was this beautiful chestnut tree with 2 kind of big trunks. And at Damanhur, we have something we call patterns that are these different symbols that allow us to enter into different types of communication, either with ourselves, to help develop new areas, to reawaken parts, to connect with other species. And one of them is to dream with plants. And so what I decided that, communing with Luca, I decided that I wanted to try a period of experimentation where I would dream with Luca. So what I would do was at night, I put 1 speaker outside near Luca, 1 speaker inside of my room, and I would turn the music of the plants on, and I would wait to hear how the patterns changed. After a time, you really get to know the specific patterns of a plant. You really start to understand, you develop a relationship that happens through music. Some people do it from a more artistic, some people do it from a more scientific. There's lots of different ways to communicate. And so what I would do is at night, I would listen for when Luca's patterns would slow down to give me an indication that Luca was going into sleep. Because one of the things that people don't know is that plants actually do sleep. They reverse their breathing patterns at night and are able to then kind of go into a sort of sleep-like state. And so what I would do is when Luca would sleep, I would work through this pattern, and then from this pattern, I would go to sleep. And the idea was this pattern helped us dream together. And I spent about a year working with Luca in this way, and it was quite exciting and interesting. There was moments of deep connection that would happen, situations that I might ask for advice from, and I would ask Luca, like, which direction. Of course, trying to take into consideration that Luca is a chestnut tree in the sacred woods. So there was lots that they could tell me, that he could tell me about the current situation there, to the point where when I would travel, I could actually connect from a distance using a series of different techniques and get an idea of what was happening at home. Like, how were the people? How was the overall environment? What was happening? If there was something that was important. And to me, it was a beautiful period that really taught me so much about myself, about the woods themselves, because when I first moved into that sacred woods, I was a city girl. I didn't really know, I didn't come from this experience of having this background in the middle of the woods. And so it was really quite beautiful to be able to have not just the human hosts that were helping me sort of acclimate and get to know, and the plants even indoors, but to have this tree, a relationship that I had never had before, really. To deeply tell me and to help guide me, but also to have this sort of friendship that we could go back and forth, because the woods were changing. They were becoming more of a temple space. There was things happening within our own family dynamics and all these different aspects.
You talk about being able to access the information when you're away. And I was also reading that when anyone first visits Damanhur, you go to the greeting tree. And then that communication goes throughout the whole area. Once the trees get to know you, how far? What kind of distance? Anywhere on the planet?
Anywhere
Or
on the planet. I mean, really, there's many different techniques to communicate with plants. Like I teach actually two different types of course: an in-person course that's connected to Damanhur specifically, where we spend 2 days really going deep into techniques that you can use, and then I have a 7-week online course that is developed with the idea of, let's look at certain relationships or certain types of experiences we have with plants and that we can learn from plants. So things like food and the whole world around food, which is way more complex than we even think it is. Because when you think of food, you also add in clothing, you add in shelter, you add in a lot of pieces. We talk about life and death, because the way plants experience life and death is very different from the way humans do. And if we truly embrace and accept the spiritual connections that we intellectually already know are real and that we sort of feel inside of ourselves that are true, our world and our way of experiencing the world would be so different, because we would be able to lift up and release some of the fears, evolve some of the fears that we have that usually come around topics of life and death. We talk about the interconnectedness of the individual, the fact that plants could really help us, talking about sustainability. Plants can really help us see how being interconnected does not mean losing your individual identity. On the contrary, you can be highly interconnected and have lots of different types of relationships and still be an individual entity that expresses your individual traits. So all these things are things we go into, and these include topics and conversations. One of the weeks is all about dreaming and distance learning and distance communication. Because being in a networked state, being in a series of beings that are individuals but within a larger network, there are multiple ways that we can communicate with them from a distance. We can either move our own energy, so we can collect our essence and have our essence go and visit them directly. We can use dreams, like I just mentioned with Luca. We can also have techniques that are like connecting to one tree that will then connect to another at a large distance. And this breaks down this feeling that we are alone and separate, because we recognize more and more as I work with plants is that the word I never really exists, because even I as an individual am a we. Even I am made up of all of my organs that each has this type of natural intelligence, of all the microbes and all the bacteria within my body, within all these different organisms that live within me. And then as I start to reach out farther, I have all these other organisms. So there's always an ecosystem around me. And my way of interacting and being in harmony is what determines my happiness, my health, my ability to be sustainable, to continue to regenerate, and to evolve.
For people that are completely new to this idea that plants have intelligence, that you can learn from plants, that maybe plants can help you develop your own intuition, that plants can help with your own healing, what is a way that someone can begin in their own backyard, in their own city park? Maybe there is no city park and they have concrete. Or maybe a potted plant. What is a way someone can begin at the very
basics? So there's lots. So one great technique is literally just sitting and listening. There's a wonderful story told by a gentleman who reached the age of retirement and who decided that for 1 year he was going to go to a local park and sit in the exact same spot for 1 year and just listen for an hour a day, every day. And it's incredible to read how this diary unfolds, because at the beginning you're doing kind of the observation from a somewhat clinical, somewhat mental approach, right? You know, oh, there's a tree there, there's a plant there, but knowing that you're going to have this opportunity to develop this over a long period of time, you sink into it and you allow yourself to start to see just the small details. And from the details, you're able to relax even farther into it, to the stories that naturally come up. We know from a scientific perspective that people who are in nature, who spend time in nature, are more relaxed. They are more generous, but even we know they're more creative. And people they often think that it's because, okay, from a biological perspective, there's these aerosols that plants give off, and these aerosols trigger parts in the body that lower the cortisol, they do this. But what if those aerosols are really just the whispers of the plants themselves? And that when you allow yourself to listen and to allow that voice that is my true nature, because remember, we are nature, right? We can observe nature, we can participate in nature, but we always have to remember that we are nature. And we allow that part to really sort of come to the surface. Now my voice and the voice of nature is one and the same. And so that's the easiest way, is to just sit in open observation, letting first your eyes take it in, because of course we are, as human beings, our predominant sense is the sense of vision. The same as for example, a dog, it's the sense of smell. You know, every species has their dominant sense. But we also have a series of other senses that are unknown to us still, that we're still developing. And so when we sit first with observation, so that we sort of connect in a way that's human-like, that it's comfortable to the human being, then we can take a step back and close our eyes and just allow ourselves to be and to receive what may come. And that's a really simple technique. I have, like I said, a 3-day, what I call a 3-day mini voyage, which gives 3 different techniques over the course of 3 days, including art, including direct contact, in order for you to start to open this channel to plant communication.
I actually just signed up for that last night as part of my process of deep diving. So I look forward to diving into that myself. Now, I think that you are perfectly positioned to bring the East and the West, the intellect and the emotion together with your truly rooted in scientific training, combined with truly connected to the network and the language and the understanding of nature and plants. So this expression keeps popping up in my head, and it's the tree hugger. Now,
right.
Tree hugger can be a really wonderful thing depending on your perspective, and it can also be the language used to, you know, like as an attack. You're a tree hugger, so you're just a hippie, woo woo, and it.
Right.
How do you bring that scientific foundation together with your nature in the plant intelligence to speak to someone who has the not so good view of the tree hugger? I have a person in my life in particular. I'm like, how do I talk to this person? Huh.
Yeah, and this happens to me a lot. Every once in a while, when I'm in, you know, giving lectures or giving talks, you know, I have that person who is that engineer or that scientist who wants to come to you and say, you know, what are you talking about? And there is an entire, from the scientific world, there is two different sides. There are those that believe plants are intelligent, and there are those that say plants do all these things, but we don't call that intelligence because intelligence requires a brain. And so I understand the argument. So for a second, I tell them, okay, let's just set aside the word intelligence. The first thing you want to do is remove some of those trigger words. And intelligence is definitely, for some people, one of those trigger words. So let's take away intelligence. But let's talk about the fact that plants have 15 more senses than we as humans do. So we as humans have our top 5, and they have those top 5. But given the fact that plants don't have legs, they can't run away from their problems. They have to solve them. So they've been able to develop another about 15, at least, that we know of, other senses that allow them to really understand the world around them. Now, in those other senses, there's a necessity for them to really communicate with lots of other types of beings, right? They have to communicate with the mycelial networks to pass nourishment back and forth, because sometimes they're in a place where they can get some things, like they can get sunlight in order to get sugars and create sugars, but maybe they can't get, you know, phosphorus, or maybe they can get nitrogen, which is a really common thing that some plants can't make on their own or can't create on their own based on where they are. So they rely on the relationships with the mycelial networks underground in order to do this. And we know from lots of different studies that they are able to use these mycelium networks to work with the fungal networks to get to other trees and plants, all kinds of different beings in order to do this. We know that plants are able to modify their physical surroundings in order to either adapt to a plant that's nearby in order for them not to be pulled up. So poison ivy is a famous one. If you look at poison ivy, the leaves are always slightly different because poison ivy looks to the plant next door and says, okay, since I get pulled up because I have all these properties that are not necessarily always so lovely to some humans, if I modify my leaves, then maybe they won't pull me up. So these are already actions of observing the world, trial and error, adapting to the conditions around me in order for me to really thrive in that environment. And now we start to look at plants with a whole different type of perspective. We recognize that they migrate, they've traveled around the world. There's lots of different pieces. So what I often encourage the sort of doubter is to say, let's take out the word intelligence, because I'm sure you're focused on the word brain, and plants don't have brains, even though the root structure of plants have at the little tips some chemicals that act a lot like neurons. And when you look at the way that plants fire electrical signals, if you look at this side by side to synapses, they're very, very close. You would have a difficult time seeing which is the brain synapses and which is instead some action potentials by plants. But let's not even go there. Let's just say the fact that we know that plants have memory. We know that they can be trained. We know that they have all the same 5 senses. We know that they have additional senses and can even use some senses that we haven't been able to identify what they are based on all the studies. And I would just start having a conversation about, what would you call all of this? Because if they tell you it's survival, then you say, great, but then I as a human am in survival mode too, because I use all my senses to do the same thing. Oh, but we humans have emotions. Okay, how do we know that plants don't have emotions? Maybe they have their own form of emotion. We still don't know enough to be able to negate anything. All we can say for sure right now is we don't know if they do this particular thing, but here's all the stuff we have been able to observe. And this is the conversation. I would also have a conversation with the tree hugger that's a little too woo, because sometimes they go a little too far, including trying to anthropomorphize the plants. So we also have to look at both sides and say, you know what, neither one of them are actually good for us, because why would I deny myself the ability to learn from a being? And I keep looking down because obviously spider plant is right here. Why would I deny myself the ability to learn from a being that has a completely different logic than I have? Not only that, 470 million years of experience on this planet. Nature is 3.8 billion years of research and development to be able to create these beautifully harmonic systems that work and that continuously evolve. But isn't that the same thing I want for myself? So why would I continue to try to negate my nature instead of embrace it and encourage it so that we can learn new models, which are really ancient models that we know work?
Yeah, a lot of people will talk about we need to save the planet. Personally, it's not the planet. They're missing the point. It's humanity is on its way out as part of this 6th mass extinction that we're in the middle of, if humans don't shift.
Right.
The coronavirus has appeared to me as it's a gift. It's not just a gift. There is plenty of challenge and trauma and that piece to it, but that is life. And the gift is that we have slowed down humanity, and all it takes is to look outside and realize how quickly the planet has been in recovery mode to know that yes, we humans really do have an effect. So you can't deny the science of your own eyes to look outside.
Absolutely.
So what would you say is a plan going forward to how can we find the motivation for, not find, how can we keep people on this track of understanding our role in combination and working with nature so that the planet can continue to heal and we can actually survive as a species?
Well, we have to remember that nature in and of itself has one major goal, which is evolution, right? Constantly. And you could look at this from a purely biological perspective, or you could look at it from a spiritual perspective. You know, from Damanhurian perspective and in spiritual physics, we have this giant game of life, and the whole goal of what we're doing here as humanity, as humanity on Earth, is to increase our complexity in order to reach a new level of evolution. And from a biological perspective, scientists will tell you that that's what all of nature wants to do. They're constantly looking for new ways to adapt to the environment in order to introduce new mutations that then they can play with and get better at, so that they always become more efficient, more dense, all these types of things. So we're really always, from a spiritual and a physical perspective, we're always talking about the same thing: as above, so below. It's the exact same thing. So if we want to do this, and we know that the ultimate goal is evolution, and we know also that species co-evolve faster. So I'll take an example I use often, which is not a plant example because it's even easier and so much more, and it's fun, is dogs and humans, right? So dogs, domesticated dogs, have developed the ability to use their eyebrows. From a wild dog perspective, eyebrows are not used. But humans, we know, use eyebrows all the time, right? Our expressions are so much around the eyes, and so much of that is the way that we use the eyebrows. So dogs have actually learned how to use eyebrows in order to better communicate with humans. Why is this? Because there is a mutual relationship here. It's a plus, it's a win-win. Dogs that live in an environment with a human that really loves them have a cushier life. They have all these beautiful experiences that they can have, and human beings also have the benefit of the dog in many different ways. And so they have evolved quicker together in these aspects. So coevolution is the fastest way for us to evolve with the least amount of errors in our trial and error period, which means that to a certain extent, plants are invested also in humans. They have over 200,000 years that they've put into the creation of the human being and all these aspects that they want us to live. So they are looking to help us, if you think about it that way. That's why I say that when we start to look at aerosols or chemical signatures or soil microbes, we start to look at them with a different viewpoint. We recognize that these are the ways that nature is hoping to co-create with us and to increase the way that we're growing. And so this is really why today, yes, it's true that we as humans, as you said, I also believe that we as humans are the ones on the brink of extinction, but they want to help us. They want to give us tools, and they have the ability to push us through illness, because they can, right, they can just increase certain aspects. Think about all the allergens that now exist in plants, like how many people are now allergic to so many things in plants that they weren't allergic to years ago, because the way that we're growing the plants is not sustainable. So
No.
plants ramp up certain things and we get sick, and therefore hopefully we'll learn and we'll change our ways. So because then they can give us also the antidote, which is other types of food. The same plant that is poisonous on one hand, used in the proper way, is actually a medicine. And so plants have this ability to work with us, to co-evolve with us by pushing us through disease and then giving us the medicine when we get it right. It's almost kind of like they're teaching us by reward and punishment a little bit in this aspect. And when you start to look at all these models, you recognize that out there are so many ways that plants have been trying to work with us and tell us. I mean, when we think about how is it that we've discovered this one plant in the Amazon, in the middle of nowhere, that's a healing property, I have a feeling that the plant sort of told you as you were walking by it, hey, look, pick me. Exactly. So this connection has always existed there. And so if we really want to help humanity, as you said, the best thing we could do is to open ourselves to this connection and recognize our true nature, and then let the plant world help us discover the models that we need to unblock this behavior, modify, and to evolve, not through pain or suffering or any of these types of things, but instead, when we are in harmony with the way that our true nature is, with the nature around us and the nature inside of us, we discover actually that it's much more fun. There's a lot more flourishing that happens. We thrive on these ways. You see the beauty in the little things that then make you stop and enjoy the big things.
createYES developed for me in 2006. I sat on the floor and I made notes. What do I not have in my life? And what do I think I could develop to help me in my life? And then do more of this. And over time, now createYES, Your Essential Self, has developed into, just in the last month, say yes to life. So that is a process of evolving from me realizing, to yeah,
Exactly.
that you have your own story with that. And I would like to take us back a little bit to how you made your own evolution. And yes, I definitely did a deep dive. How you made your own evolution from your marriage and evolving out of that relationship into, was it intentional dance that was your transitional moment? You can tell us a little more about that?
It was. Well, as I said, when I came out of college, I had a few different options in front of me, and I ended up choosing the high-tech route, which was really quite exciting. I worked in the internet when it was really just a startup, when it was the beginning of it. Eventually moved on to Microsoft. My now ex-husband, but a wonderful, beautiful man that was my husband, and I got together in this world of high tech. He was also a musician. It was, from the outside, everything was beautiful. But from the inside, for me, it was really quite difficult to navigate this sort of technical side of myself with this creative side that didn't have an outlet for many different reasons. My mind doesn't work in the traditional creative ways. I don't paint, and I have danced and I have acted and I've sung before, but those aren't like my strengths in that aspect. And so here I was with this incredibly talented developer, and he was an incredibly talented manager, and he was an incredibly talented musician, and I was just sitting there going, what the heck am I doing with my life? And I was working in an industry that, while can also be very creative, wasn't my creative expression. And it was the intentional dance community. When I stepped into, I was doing some acting at the time in addition to my day job, and I was cast in a role that it was kind of a big series of synchronicities. I walked into an audition, and a person who happened to have worked with me when I was working on a more creative side of the internet audio video world was the director. And he just looked at me and he was like, oh my God, so great to see you. We hadn't seen each other in years, because by this point I had left that company and was working at Microsoft. And he ended up casting me in. It wasn't a traditional event. It was an intentional dance party with what we called a performance, a ritual performance in the middle of it. And I had no idea what any of this stuff was. I mean, I was like, I had dabbled in spirituality and when I was younger, and I had like, checked out the Kabbalah when I was, at some point in my work. And I knew about people that went to like raves, and I was like, is it a rave? They're like, not exactly. And as we led up into it, I could feel my personal creativity starting to come to the surface. I could feel similar to that feeling that I had when I was with plants, because music has always been a very transformational aspect for me. And rather than fighting it at this point, I said, you know what? I can't spend, kind of, if anybody's read Eat, Love, Pray, you remember that, Elizabeth Gilbert talks about how she spent all these nights in the bathroom, on her knees crying. And I used to sit underneath the piano bench as my ex-husband would play the piano, and I would cry. So I completely understood what she meant when she said this. Because again, we think that what we want is money or certain types of success, or we think we want, the car or the ability to do some things. We were going on vacation, we were doing everything. But if you don't have that piece of you, if you don't have that awakening inside of you of what is important and the values that are important to you, everything else just sort of fades away. And so leading up to this, as I was getting to know these people, I was starting to see that there was a world that was available to me that I had never even thought of. And that led me to say, you know what, it's time for me to take time for myself, for me to understand, and that it's not that this is bad. We don't leave all situations because they're bad. We leave them because we've evolved past them. And I felt like my years with my ex-husband, my years in software, which had many amazing experiences. I mean, Microsoft has a theater troupe, and it was a wonderful place to work. And like I said, my ex-husband is a wonderful, wonderful human being. But I felt like I had evolved past it. I had gone through the safe side. And it was time for me now to take a risk and to put my values and my bigger talents to risk falling down, you know, and to risk making this leap into something else. So on the night of the events that I had worked so hard to create with these other people, I basically told my ex-husband that I didn't know if I would be home ever again. And he just was like, what? And I was like, I think we're done, I think. And I sure enough came home the next morning and I said, we're done. Like, this is over for me. And I started a new life, which included eventually leaving the high tech and moving into producing events that then got, you know, had me working with basically co-owning a circus, and then going on tour with Cirque du Soleil, and eventually brought me to Europe, which is where I eventually was teaching Kabbalah and sacred language, and all these new worlds opened to me. And you know, it hasn't been exactly, and that's what it is. It's an evolution where I you know, when I go into my teaching, I do a lot of one-on-one leadership mentorship. That's kind of my main work. I mean, I teach my courses also, and it's all connected to this idea of how do we become the leader of our own lives? How do we really lead from a naturally conscious way? How do we reawaken to who we are so that it is not an effort to lead? And leading doesn't mean I stand at the top of the pyramid, but leading means that I feel like in any situation, I can listen and choose consciously the right path for me to take. To me, that is real empowerment and leadership. And that I can do that in alignment with my own true nature, with my values, that I don't feel like I have to compromise always, other than the natural sacrifices that happen in order for us to create balanced relationships. And so all of these aspects, I talk a lot about the idea that we have our passions, we have that are what kind of helps us live out our what's called deep patterns. In biomimicry, we talk about, which is how we look to nature for examples. We see these deep patterns. Nature has deep patterns, filtration, the way that they create relationships, many different aspects. And each one of us has a series of deep patterns. And so when we look at our deep patterns, we see that our passions change over time because they are changing in order to give us the opportunity to express those deep patterns, because those deep patterns are what allows us to accomplish our life mission and our life purpose, and our life purpose ties into our soul mission. So all of these different aspects connect together so that your soul is you're constantly evolving in order to achieve what your soul needs to achieve, that mission that has been given in this cosmic game of life. And so when we look to nature, we realize that we have these same patterns and we can learn about them, and that I can learn how to do this in a naturally conscious, harmonic way.
Well, that's really wonderful and inspiring. And reading about you and seeing where you were, knowing how much you really integrate that intellect and the emotion, it's very inspiring. And it is. And for me, I'm at the very beginning. And I'm like, oh, I want some of what she has.
Well, you can come get it.
Yes. There will be a way. There
Absolutely.
will be a time. I don't know when or how. But
well, anybody who wants to connect to me, I'm all over the place, and I'm always available to have a conversation and to see what is it that you really need in this particular moment. Because each one of us, like you just said, we're in different places and our evolution is different. Never compare yourself to anybody else, because you don't know where they are in their evolutionary journey. And you don't know also what they're living on the inside, right? That's the other piece, is something might seem beautiful because those are your values, but they might not be for somebody else because their values are slightly different. And so that's why I always believe in that conversation, and I'm always available to have that conversation to see if I can be of service, if I can really help you as you lean into this whole new path that you're exploring, because nature gives us so many models and it gives us so much help in order to accomplish and evolve limiting beliefs and mindset issues and blocks that are holding you back, so that you evolve them and you use them to their greatest advantage. Because in nature, there are no negative traits. It's just how you use them, how and when you use them.
It's your perspective.
Absolutely.
It's not the concept, it's how you perceive it. And I liked
Absolutely.
how you phrased shift, I forget how you phrased it exactly, but shift your limiting belief into your superpower or something like that.
To evolve your blocks into a feature that you master. Exactly. Because each one of what we call our limiting beliefs, our blocks today, really are just a feature, right? Functions. When you go and you look at nature, everything nature does. Why is this green? There's a function for it. Photosynthesis causes the chlorophyll, which causes this, la 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 la. So you get into it. When you recognize that everything that I have, determination in the right amount is something that really accomplishes so many things. But if I go overboard, it turns into stubbornness.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So we always have this game that we're playing, and only I can evaluate how much of something to put in. So that's why I need to evolve my belief, my limits, into the feature that it is, so that I can master it and use it in whatever way. Because even stubbornness can be useful.
Yes. One of my patterns would be collecting. And what I really want is connection. So transitioning from collection to connection, that's just come up in the last couple of days to put those words together. And collection is important in life. You know, squirrels need to collect their food to get through the winter. We need to collect, but when it goes overboard, then it's a problem and it blocks the system and it can't function. I get it. I know it. I'm living it. It is imbued, and it is time to release that. What if I was to bring up that one thing, how would you bring someone through that process at the beginning? Like what is one little example? I think this might help more. I mean, obviously me, yes, I'm the one here, but it's not just for me. Any question anyone ever has helps many people.
Absolutely. And actually, I had a client. So I teach a 5-day boot camp called Kickstart Your Conscious Revolution. And it's the opportunity to evolve one trait into a feature. And one of the people in my boot camp had exactly this one. She's like, I just collect stuff. So what we do is we go back in that boot camp to when did this collecting first start? And understanding where it came from. Because almost anything that today we consider to be a block or a limiting belief, at one point started with a good purpose, with something that was helpful to you. So we went back either in this lifetime, or you can even go back into a past life, depending on your belief system, and you can pinpoint when this started to happen, and then look at what was it there to do. So your first step is to just go back and say, what was this here to do? Why did it manifest? So that then you can go and touch into that, figure out how to bring that feature and move it across the timeline, rather than because at some point it turned into something negative that you started to view negatively. But we want to use the period where it was a function, and we want to bring that across the timeline. So my suggestion would always be, go back from the collecting to when did the collecting first start, and why did it start, and see there what was the aspect of what you were trying to accomplish. So that then we can work through a series of different techniques to bring it out and to start to turn the positive features back into it.
So in other words, go back to the root, go back to the origin, and when it was a good thing that you were doing.
Right.
And when I think about going back to the root, it brings up the idea of how much nature language is in our language. Let's get to the root of the problem. Or let's look for the fruits of our labor. Let's look at the interconnectedness and the web, and so many natural descriptors are in our everyday language.
Absolutely. And absolutely. And this is one of the kind of scary things that's happening right now, because we have all of these natural descriptions. And it was a time, if you go back to the songs of the 1950s, the 1960s, even into the 1970s, so many of them had nature in them. There was still this connection where we were looking at the outside, and that wonder and that awe was generating our creativity, was connecting in to these parts and these creative aspects of ourselves, you know, from Strawberry Fields to all these other types of songs. Today, many of these are being replaced with digital images. So when we look at a web, we no longer think of a spider first. We're thinking first of like the web, the World Wide Web, or the internet, or things of that nature. All these terms, rooted, streams, like when I think of a stream, I don't first think about running water. I first think about like a stream of, you know, other aspects. And so it's important for us to reconnect, because these are the models, these are the examples that we're seeing of our disconnection. So it's okay for the things to have the same terms, but if the predominance now is that when I use these nature-inspired terms, I first think of the digital-only world, and I almost forget that there's a natural equivalent to them, there is where the problem starts. So there has been a movement to like coin new words. We shouldn't colonize words that already have a nature connotation, but it would be better for us to coin them and coin words that allow us to give these things different. So expand our vocabulary so that we can embrace both of them, but we don't have to have one or the other. Because today, overloading a word means that eventually, I used to have, because I was an actor and I did a lot of Shakespeare, I had the Oxford English Dictionary, which is a humongous, you can either have the humongous volume set, which I didn't have, or it was two big ones. I can't show you outside, but they were big. And it had tiny little print, and it had a magnifying glass in order to read it. That's how small it is. And you could take any word and read the etymology of it and the original definitions, and we've lost so much already. Imagine now if we continue to think of all of these nature terms by just their digital, eventually the nature aspects are going to fall into disuse, and we're going to lose an entire richness of our vocabulary. So this is another way that we also can work with others, right? Reconquering our natural connections through language, through vocabulary, through music, through sound, through poetry, which is why the mini voyage that you're doing, and even in my own mentoring, when I work with people individually, we work a lot on language and art to bring things out in a way that reconnects us back to our natural and creative self.
So even with our use of language, it would behoove us to go back in time and reconnect with that, because we've lost so much.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Now, if anyone is listening, if they don't get the idea yet of how much depth there is, just keep listening. And you are online in many different ways. You have your YouTube channel, you're on Instagram, you have Facebook groups. What are some other ways? I mean, what's a place to start besides your website? I mean,
place to start would be Facebook. Facebook is my go-to right now. I have my Facebook page where every day I publish the science side as well as then all the other aspects, because I like that to be the good balance between them. And then I have two groups that are dedicated to kind of my two loves. One is the plant music, so it's called The Effects of Plant Music on Human Health and Interspecies Art. And that is the place where we all come together to talk about what are different things that are coming out in the world of plant music, what are the devices that exist now, what does it mean, how do we create new music, how do we do new research and studies and healings and things of that nature. And then the other side is the naturally conscious community, and the naturally conscious community is a place for conscious leadership where we talk about and we discuss the techniques and the ideas of what is a naturally conscious leader. How do we bring our consciousness to the surface so that we are no longer being pulled in different directions, but instead we're taking that breath of time that is necessary for us to see the options before us and make a choice. Because each one of us, like you said, we want to create the conditions conducive to life. We want our choices to be something that encourages growth and evolution. And that requires that conscious leadership. And that is a natural, innate part of ourselves. So naturally conscious community, or effects of plant music on human health. And then my Facebook page is just my name.
Great. Well, I hope that people can go there, and we'll make sure that we post the links and have ways for people to reach you outside of just this interview. And I want to wrap up, I think, with some more focus on the spider plant.
Mm-hmm.
Your partner there, can we?
My partner in crime is still sitting here. You know,
it's been nice to hear the sounds come through. And
all right, let's turn this. You ready?
And if someone wants to have one of these devices for themselves, how would they get one?
They could get one by going to musicoftheplants.com. And from there, they can look into who their closest vendor is. So there's lots of different vendors now around the world. And that's the easiest and the best way. If there's not, then from the Music of the Plants website themselves, they can find the device and they can purchase it from there.
That sounds great.
All right, lower this so that you can see.
It's very joyful.
Yeah, Key is prolific.
Yeah.
You know, I am at the very beginning of the lockdown period with coronavirus. Because we were completely locked down at one period. And when we locked down, there was a publishing of somebody who had turned the virus, certain aspects of the virus, into music. And so
it is phenomenal.
Yeah, so I had this one track where both of them played together. So I had this playing, and I had, you know, Spider Plant making music because of the work that we do on the, you know, the healing effects. So I asked Spider Plant to create music listening to the virus that could help people in that aspect. So I also have a SoundCloud where you can listen to these tracks and you can hear the virtual ensemble that we created, but also these various tracks. And that mini voyage was completely created with Spider Plant. So there is a small meditation that is with Key. So to another way of connecting to plants through the music.
Wonderful. Well, I did actually hear that creation of the genetic code of the virus turned into sounds, and wow.
It is. It was quite interesting, and it was interesting to hear them. I had them play together for more than an hour, and there was a period at which all of a sudden the music clicked, like, because, you know, one is recorded, and then I had this, you know, I had Key playing, like Spider Plant playing live, and it was incredible to hear that moment when there was a click and they started to play together, and you could hear that Spider Plant was adapting to the music of this genetic, you know, encoding. And it was really, because I put it on, and then I started to record it, and I let it play as I was working, and I just wanted to hear, and I was, especially because I was in an environment that we were immersed, there was all these things that were happening, so I just kind of wanted that plant music healing, which is another thing that I've, you know, tested and worked with and researched over the last few years. And it was just amazing to hear when that click happens. So you can listen to that track.
That sounds wonderful. I will be doing that soon. Yeah, I grew up on what I now call Winnie the Pooh's 100-acre wood.
Oh, wow.
That's up in Maine. We had, you know, and it's still there. My dad is there. There's a gravel pit, a forest, a field, a brook, everything. Many different environments within that land. And I feel called back. I left Maine and went to Colorado, and I was out there for my adult life and most of, well, up until now. And I've just recently come back to the East Coast, so I'm close to Maine. But there's a calling that land that I really was out in the woods, and I was in the stream, and I was in the sand, and it calls to me. So I think that there might be a connection in that rootedness that brings us back home.
Right, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the other piece of it, right? Almost all of us have some experience, even those of us that don't recognize, like even myself who doesn't recognize some things because I think, oh, well, I grew up with nature around me, but not. And I grew up on the beach and I grew up in the environment. And when I went, after I had started to work with plants and I went back to my hometown, it was as if a whole world opened up. And I started to recognize also patterns that we have, things that we do there that are deeply connected, even though we're not conscious of it. And that was the other aspect that was quite opening to me, to be consciously aware of some of the unconscious choices that I believe has kept my people back in my hometown safe and healthy from so many different aspects, from hurricanes, from other things, that doesn't seem logical, but there is a logic to it when you start to enter into a plant mind.
Well, Tigrilla, I want to thank you so much for all of your sharing and your stories and your knowledge and being you, putting all of this out there and being that shining example. You know, when you let your own light shine, you unconsciously give others permission to do the same, says Marianne Williamson. It's one of my favorite quotes, but I think there may be some new favorite quotes coming in my near future. I look forward to working with you again.
Me too. And thank you so much for this. This was a wonderful opportunity for both of us to share with you, our experiences.
Well, thank you.